Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Zarbo Audio Projects Memorial Stadium. Let's get ready for tonight's main event, the Bluetooth Speaker Build-Off. In this corner, coming in at 12 volts and 3 amps, a product of the best woodworking tools currently available, the Pro Tool Bluetooth Speaker. And in this corner, coming in at 8 watts per channel, the lowly hometown hero built with common household power tools, the Basic Build Bluetooth Speaker. Dustins, go to your corners, and at the sound of the Bluetooth connection tone, I want you to come out fighting! Hey, thanks for stopping by. My name's Thomas, and this is Zarbo Audio Projects. Well, you've seen them, I've seen them. There are dozens, maybe hundreds of videos on YouTube on how to construct your own Bluetooth speaker. I've watched a lot of them, and I may have even made one myself. It's fun watching someone build a radio from scratch, but very few of these videos address the construction process from the perspective of the average person who doesn't have a shop full of woodworking tools. Well, today, I'm going to remedy that. As you saw in the intro, I'll build the same stereo Bluetooth speaker 2 different ways. I'll construct one with all of my big fancy woodworking tools, and I'll build another with only a few commonly available tools that many people would most likely have. So, before we start this build-off, let's lay down the ground rules. For the Pro Tools build, I'll use a table saw, miter saw, power sander, router, as well as any other less common tools that I, as an experienced woodworker, would normally use for a project like this. For the Basic Tools build, the only power tools I'll use are a jigsaw and an electric drill. That's it. So here's my thinking. If you wanted to build one of these and you don't have a jigsaw or a drill, you likely know someone who does. They're fairly common tools, and if you don't have access for some reason, they can be purchased inexpensively at a place like Harbor Freight Tools, for instance. There will be other smaller differences in how I tackle various construction tasks as well, and I'll note those differences as we go along. So before you build anything, you gotta have a plan. I worked out the basic layout of the box and came up with an enclosure size in BaseBox Pro for the drivers that was pretty close to the original speaker module. And then I made a full-size drawing to get a sense of scale and proportion. And then I built a prototype cabinet to make sure that this setup would work as intended. You know, it looks kind of unique, and it sounded pretty good too. And thankfully, I arranged the panels so that I had just enough room to get all the bits in there, even with my fat fingers. So, now that I've proven this design will work, it's time to do some constructificating around here. First step, mark and cut the various enclosure pieces. I usually draw up a quick cut sheet with all the panels I'll need to help me stay organized. I'm using 1/4-inch plywood here because I had some. MDF would work fine as well. Of course, the 1/4-inch ply wasn't really a 1/4-inch thick. It was more like 0.211 inches thick, as you can see, which isn't a big deal, but I did have to make some adjustments for this, as you'll see in a bit. When I make cuts on the table saw, I don't usually mark the sizes on the board, as I just set the width of the cut and begin trimming the boards. But for the Basic Tools build, I need to draw lines that I can follow with the jigsaw. The idea here is to leave the line visible so you can sand up to it and get a flat end panel. And the reason you need to do this is because it's nearly impossible to get a perfectly straight cut with a jigsaw. I knew I was going to have to do some sanding anyway, so I just cut close to the line and, as you can see, sanded up to it, keeping the panel perpendicular to the table, checking with the square occasionally. Alternatively, you could secure the piece, then use a small sanding block on it, but I like to make a large sanding block and clamp it to the work table, and then sand the piece to it. I feel like I have more control this way. This can be easily done by just gluing a sheet of sandpaper to a scrap board. This plywood is soft and sands really quick, so I was done in no time. I just had to make sure that the front, back, and top were all the same width, so I have no gaps in the glue up later. Now that I have the panels cut out for the basic build, I can set up the table saw and cut the panels to width for the Pro version. There are only a few cuts, and of course, each like panel that you cut is exactly the same width, the benefit of using a table saw. What I didn't mill on the table saw, I cut on the miter saw using a stop block to ensure consistency between cuts. Yeah, for some reason I thought that standing directly in front of the camera was a good idea here. Well, now that I have all the panels cut out and sanded here for both enclosures, which method takes the win? The Pro Tools or Basic Tools build? Due to the increased speed, accuracy, and consistency, the Pro... Whoa, slow your roll. You forgot all about the bottoms. As you can see, the base pieces have a 28-degree bevel machined on them to spruce them up a bit. This was very easy to do on the table saw, not so easy to do with the jigsaw though. It wasn't really that bad, but there just wasn't much meat on the bottom of the jigsaw to keep the angle straight. I got it done though, and it just needed a little bit of sanding to smooth out the bevel cut on that piece of 3/4 inch plywood. But, oops. It's pretty close to the one that I cut on the table saw. Yeah, accidentally cut the wrong one. I cut the basic one on the table saw when I should have cut the Pro one. But they were the same size after I sanded, so no harm, no foul, but still I messed up. Anyway, didn't want to confuse you, but so I think this basic one that I sanded on the sanding block is going to be okay. I'm just going to tweak this angle just a little bit more, and I think I'm pretty much there. So the verdict? Yeah, I thought so. Well, we're ready to glue up the cabinets now. We've got them cut out, sanded. We have our holes drilled for the speaker wire, so we don't have to do that after the cabinet's assembled. Now all we have to do is glue them together. Now, because of the fact that I cut the basic version of this with hand tools and I sanded to the line, this isn't quite as exactly precise as the ones that I cut using my Pro Tools. So what I'm going to do for the basic one is I'm going to use this Gorilla Glue. Gorilla Glue looks like honey. It expands just a little bit as it cures, kind of foams up a little bit. We call it foaming up. And what happens is it sort of expands to fill any small gaps, so that it's going to leave you with an airtight cabinet, even if your seams aren't 100% touching. Might be off by a smidge here or there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use tape as a clamp, because you might not have clamps if you have basic tools. You can go out and get a roll of blue painter's tape. It's not that expensive, or masking tape. I just happen to like this stuff. It comes off easy. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply Gorilla Glue. This is messy stuff, so I'm going to wear gloves for this. It stains your skin really bad. It takes a couple days to come off, and so we're going to use gloves. So I have my prototype here to look at to see how it's assembled, but you use a diagram or whatever. Sometimes you can get a little confused and glue a panel this way when it should be this way. So this, having something to look at, just helps you avoid that. And I already drew the lines on this so that I know approximately where to put my braces. I'm not going to be too overly concerned if they're perfect. I want them close, and I'll do it by eye, and that should be good enough. Yeah, I won't bore you with a lot of footage of me spreading glue around, but basically the procedure is put a medium bead of glue down and spread it out with your finger. And this is about how much you need. Okay, now I'm going to glue the front on, and that'll be followed up by the sides. Okay, now put some glue on the sides. Now the sides are like caps. They cover everything, all the rest of the cabinet. So I'll just put a bead of glue like this around it, and that should work very well. Get some of this extra glue off, because what we're going to do now is, instead of clamping, we're going to use the tape. A clamp is anything that holds things together, and tape holds things together. So this is our clamp. Again, if you can pull the tape to try to get a little bit of tension on it while you're putting it down, all the better. Well, let me just bring this up a little closer to show you. What we have here is a box that is essentially glued up and clamped up. Now you can see those inner divider panels, they're off by just a little bit. One's twisted, so I'm just going to fix that. So there, I just sort of fixed that. They're lined up now. And I'm going to put a little bit more tape on it to pull it together just a little extra bit. Here's our cabinet. So you'll see when it cures, we'll get a close-up inside, and we'll get to see that Gorilla Glue foaming out and sealing up all of the seams, so you don't need to caulk. That's why I'm using the Gorilla Glue for this basic box. It's a little messier, but it does seal the inside of the cabinet up, because this basic box isn't quite as perfect, and that's okay. Okay, now we're ready to glue up the 2 Pro boxes. Wait, hold on, 2 Pro boxes? Yeah, if you didn't notice already, we've been looking at pieces for 3 boxes, not 2. I'm making these radios for my friend, and he has 3 children, so I'm making 2 of the Pro Tools boxes. So there, the cat's out of the bag. For that, like I said, we're going to use the Type-On 2 wood glue. Because these are all cut really with precise tolerances, being as I use the table saw and compound miter saw, everything's going to touch, so a little bit of glue is going to be all we need to seal up all of the joints that we have here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to clamp this up using the tape as well. I might throw a few clamps on it. I could use these clamps, I have plenty of them, and in fact I might just do that. But you can also use the tape, even though you've got things, you've got clamps at your disposal, you can also use the tape to hold things together, because this doesn't need a tremendous amount of clamping force. This wood is very porous. It's I think it's Sandy or Luan grade of plywood that I'm using for this, and that's what I'd recommend, because it's easy to cut, it's easy to sand, and the glue is going to really soak into it, so you don't need tremendous clamping force. So I think tape would be more than enough. Well, I guess you can tell by looking at this that I really actually do prefer to use the tape to glue these small boxes up. I used the clamps on the first Pro Build box, and it actually bent the panels a little bit, or at least tweaked them. So I think the tape provides just the right amount of clamping force, and it's quick and easy. So, well, I guess you can probably figure who won this round. So we want to get these smooth and flush, so then we can measure for the driver openings. And the VU meter, and actually the volume knob, and the on-off switch, and the power input, and the 2 vents. Okay, I guess I have a lot to do actually, but first thing we got to get these things sanded, flush, and smooth, and then we can easily mark off everything that needs to be opened up after that. Well, that's a lot to do, so let's get started. Well, in order to get these 2 Pro cabinets sanded down square and smooth, I'm going to use my 6-inch belt sander from Harbor Freight Tools I bought a few years back. Of course, whenever you're running power tools, you've got to wear your safety goggles. These are protected in the front and the sides. And I like to preserve my hearing because I do like to listen to music, so I'm also going to use, I think they call these earmuffs, but it's not really cold down here, but it's hearing protection nonetheless. And since this wood's really dusty, I'm going to wear some good dust protection to make sure that the dust that's floating around down here doesn't get in my lungs. So let's get started with that. Remember a few minutes ago when I mentioned that the 1/4-inch plywood I had wasn't really a full 1/4-inch thick? Well, here's where it becomes an issue. Because the front and back panels don't quite add up to 1/2 of an inch, the sides end up being a little bit deeper than they should be. That's nothing that the power belt sander can't handle though. Well, here I have the 2 Pro cabinets sanded down nicely, ready to go, ready to have all the cutouts marked up and have at it with the saber saw to make the driver openings, etc. Now we have the basic tools build, just as nice. I got a little more glue squeeze out, and I have a little sanding to do here and there with the panels, but we're going to do that manually. As is the case with the basic build, we're using more manual tools. So here we are. All 3 boxes have been sanded and they all look pretty good. They're all basically smooth. I wonder at this point if we can tell which one's which. Mr. Fancy Schmance Pro Tools, is your box any better than the one made with the basic tools at this point? Here I'm marking out where the power switch will go on the center of the top by drawing a line from corner to corner. And now I'm measuring and drawing where to cut the driver and VU meter openings, as well as where to drill the holes for the vents, power jack, and volume knob. Okay, now it's time to drill the hole for the amplifier and the potentiometer here. This is not exactly straightforward though, because as you can see on the prototype, I did have to make a recess for the amplifier potentiometer, because as I hold this up to this all the way up, I think you can see that there just isn't enough threads to be able to latch onto. So I'm going to have to make a recess like I did in the prototype. And the way I'm going to do that is with 1/2-inch drill bit. Profile looks like that. Now that's not optimum, okay? Ideally what you want is, you want to use a Forstner bit with a flat bottom. It's got this little chisel point there to get you right dead center, and then this thing makes a flat bottomed hole. But I think that most people, average people, are not going to have a Forstner bit set. I didn't have one until 3 or 4 years ago myself. They're much more likely to have a few of these in their drawer. So this is what I'm going to use. But this is a little tricky because it's going to be fairly easy to just blow through this and go right through. Then you wouldn't have anything to mount the potentiometer shaft to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go real gentle. I'm going to wobble it around a little bit. I'm going to try to mitigate that chisel point. Try to get it flat, 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 so I can get the bottom sort of a little bit flat if I can. So let's give it a try. The trick is don't go all the way through. Use light pressure. Let's see how we do. Just a little bit more. I'm not using a lot of pressure, very little. I'm trying to make a very round circle as I move the drill around. I think that might be enough. I'm going to drill the 1/4-inch hole now using the same standard drill bit and see how it works. But before we drill that out, if you just try to push the drill bit through, it's probably gonna make a lot of splinters inside. So I'm gonna put a piece of board in behind it for the drill bit to go into to prevent that from happening. So the question is, did we make enough of an opening, of a recess, in order to get those threads through and be able to get a nut on it? So let's test it out. So the way to do that is real small little jeweler's screwdriver, flat edge, and just stick it on there and try to spin it. Once it starts spinning, you'll just be able to grab a corner and just sort of turn it that way. I tell you, it looks like we got it. Look at that. That did it. It's not the prettiest thing in the world, but it is in there. It is flush. It's stable, and that will work. So I've got the holes already marked for the 2 potentiometer shafts on the Pro builds. Now it's a good tip to use a push pin. Just find the center, wiggle it around, make a little hole there, make it easy to find dead center of where you're trying to drill. So what we're doing is, first we're going to make a recess hole with the 1/2-inch Forstner bit before we drill out the real hole. Now if we drill out the 1/4-inch hole first, we might have a little bit of a hard time getting this centered because this is going to just want to wobble. It doesn't have an arrow point to find the hole it's just flat. So we're going to do this first, then we're going to drill the hole out. So I'm going to stand up for this. I'll have more control over it, I think. Now for the 1/4-inch hole to go all the way through. And again, I'm going to use my sacrificial board to prevent splintering. Now I'm drilling holes so I can get the jigsaw blade started to cut out all the speaker driver and VU meter openings, as well as the openings for the power jack and port tubes. Now it's just a matter of cutting on the lines with the jigsaw. I also test fit to make sure that the drivers fit in the openings. I'm trying to be a little more careful with the VU meter opening. The speaker openings I wasn't so concerned with, as I will just be glumping in black silicone to seal them in. See? Done in no time. Even though I tried to cut on the lines, the openings still need to be massaged just a bit. For the Pro Tools build, a file or a wood rasp will get the job done. But some folks may not have a file. So for the basic tools build, we're actually going to make a tool to do the same job. We're going to apply some of our wood glue to the back of a piece of sandpaper and glue it to a standard paint stick, wrapping it around tightly. As you can see, I used the file on the Pro Tools build. And I used our newly created sandpaper file on the basic tools build. I can attest that our homemade file did a fantastic job smoothing out the openings, and you won't miss not having a file one little bit. Well, now that the boxes have been sanded smooth, the joints have been sanded flush, what I want to do now is put a little round over on all the corners. Since we're going to paint these, I think that's probably the best thing to do rather than leave the corner sharp. Any little thing can ding a corner and kind of make it look sort of bad real quick. So put a little round over on the corners is a good way to hide any of those little infractions as the piece goes through life, you know. What I'm using here is what's called a trim router. It's usually used for spinning smaller bits to trim counter laminate and veneers, but it handles this 1/8 inch round over job just fine. Here's a close-up of the bit. And now I'm using some sandpaper to ease the edges of the basic tools cabinet. If you see how I'm moving the sanding block, I'm going back and forth fairly quickly, but I'm altering the position from horizontal to vertical slowly to try to make sure I get even sanding from the top and the bottom of the piece. Now that the completed enclosures have been machined to accept the drivers and all the other bits, which method do I think won this round? Pro Tools or Basic Tools? Well, a lot of the processes were the same, but sanding the boxes was easier with the power tools. But then again, I think our bootleg sandpaper file may have worked even better than the real file. So I'm calling this round a draw.